these platforms are managing people by algorithms. They're managing wages by algorithm. They're managing visibility by algorithm. I mean, in essence, we have created a workforce that is managed by technology. We have deniers on one side and we have devotees on the other. So we have deniers and devotees, depending on however the algorithm sees you, might be afforded different opportunities than how the algorithm sees me. And that has serious implications, but I think eventually, reckoning is going to come. There's this three-legged stool that no one is talking about.
I wanted to have this conversation today because there's so much noise around AI right now. There's fear, there's hype, there's confusion, but there's not enough honest conversations about what people should actually be focusing on, what you should do to prepare. And so today I am joined by Dr. Mike Dunn to talk about the future of skills, education, creativity, and how AI is reshaping the world much faster than most people realize. Mike Dunn is a professor at Skidmore College. His work explores how AI, online labor markets, and platform-driven economies are reshaping careers. I've had the opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Mike Dunn over the last few years. Together, we've co-authored multiple publications on digital labor platform and the social impacts of these emerging technologies. Dr. Dunn brings great points and a very thoughtful attitude about what we should be focusing on with AI, what things we're missing, and what skills we need to be focusing on to be better prepared for the future of work. Welcome to Mike Dunn. Thank you, Mike, for joining me. I just want to get started with a quick question. So for someone who hasn't heard of your work, how do you describe your focus area and what drew you to that topic?
Yeah, so I guess maybe broadly, I would say I'm interested in sort of this confluence of where the worker is, where the employee is, and kind of what's in the middle, sort of the technology in the middle of it. So really how technology is changing work. Funny enough, what drew me to it was an NPR story of all things. So I had decided to make a career change, and I was visiting University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill on my recruiting visit, where I ended up attending, and I was going to like the like recruitment barbecue. So I'd left the hotel and I had NPR on, and there was a story about Mechanical Turk. And it was one of those like NPR moments where you drive by the location of where you want to go. And so I drove by and I parked in a Walgreens parking lot to finish listening to this story
Mm.
because I couldn't actually comprehend Mechanical Turk. It made no sense to me. People were taking jobs for like 15 cents, 10 cents, and it didn't comprehend. And when I wrote my essays for entrance, I was actually interested in the informal economy of immigrant labor.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I thought I was going, but I just could not get Mechanical Turk out of my head. And I went down a wormhole. I ended up going on Mechanical Turk. I tried to do a couple of the tasks. It was just so weird to me. And I ended up doing my master's thesis on it. And sort of right around that time is when sort of Uber and the platform economy was really taking shape. And that sort of was the beginning of it all. So thanks to NPR, maybe it was Dan Inskeep. I don't remember who it was, but I do remember driving by the joint and parking in a Walgreens parking lot.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great story. I don't think I had ever heard that like origin story of how Mike Dunn
Yeah.
came to be. That's so great. Okay, so yeah, like you said, you have your research has looked at the rise of digital labor platforms over, for over a decade now. And so one of the things that I was interested in is what is the most significant shift you've observed? And then also thinking about it from the current time, how is AI accelerating or complicating that?
Yeah, it all comes down to the algorithm. In insofar as these platforms are managing people by algorithms, they're managing wages by algorithm, They're managing visibility by algorithm. I mean, in essence, we have created a workforce that is managed by technology. And at the end of the day, that is what artificial intelligence is. It is sort of a hyper form of algorithmic management that actually I think is now transcending into the regular workplace in many ways that sort of maybe the digital labor platform was happening 10 or 15 years ago. But sort of at the end of the day, it's this idea that employees are being managed, they're being mediated, they're being monitored, they're being directed, and frankly, their opportunities are being decided by algorithms. So you, depending on however the algorithm sees you, might be afforded different opportunities than how the algorithm sees me. And that has serious implications sort of beyond just very objective things like how many jobs you've done. But is it looking at your face? Is it looking at your trying to determine your gender? It's certainly trying to determine, and this has been proven on and on and on. It tries to determine the lowest wage that you would be willing to take a job. So if you and I were both Uber workers and we opened up the Uber app as drivers, each job that we would get given would is a guess by the algorithm to say what is the minimum amount that Isabel would be willing to accept this job. What is the minimum amount? And that could be different. So I think that has this sort of overarching, like this overarching discrimination and bias inherent in it already. But just
Yeah.
think about it. We're being managed by algorithms.
Yeah, that is the best way to put it. I think we're being managed by algorithms, and it's permeating not just it's permeating outside of those platforms too. I feel like again, now leadership is seeing like, oh, we could track workers. Now I've heard of conversations of like, what if we look at what the inputs are to ChatGPT to determine our like how productive our workforce is, and that kind of scares me a little bit because yeah, it's just hyper surveillance, hyper, you know, algorithmic management, and yeah, it's not going away anytime soon. How are you seeing AI? So just for context, Mike has looked at a bunch of different platforms, but specifically Upwork, right? And so how is AI kind of being injected in Upwork or other similar platforms?
Yeah, so I guess there's multiple ways to look at it in terms of how AI is being injected. I mean, certainly Upwork as a platform is trying to introduce tools for both clients and for freelancers that are driven by AI. But I think the more interesting story to be told is something that sort of our research is looking at right now is trying to understand. So, taking a step back, we work on the assumption that sort of freelance workers are kind of on the cutting edge insofar as people look to freelance workers for skills that they may not have or their organization may not have or a specialty they might have. So when sort of technology or disruption happens in the marketplace, this might be more acutely be seen at the freelancer level first before it's actually seen sort of writ large. So with that in mind, sort of we approach this by trying to understand how is artificial intelligence changing work, at least in the freelance. And I have two perspectives to share. One is from the client perspective, which I think is not particularly seen very much in literature, and then of course from the freelancer perspective. So I guess I'll start from the freelancer perspective, and I would say that if I had to classify workers, they're on a continuum where we have deniers on one side and we have devotees on the other. So we have deniers and devotees, and the deniers are the people that are saying this is bull BS.
Yeah.
It is just another fad. I don't even want to learn it. It doesn't matter. And then we have people who are jumping in with both feet in. And
Cool.
then kind of in the middle, we have, I would say it's this gradation of doubters and deliberators. The doubters are like, something's happening. I don't really want to play in this. And then there's people who are really, really trying to understand what's happening. What I can tell you is a couple, and sort of anecdotally, one of the things that have surprised me is the people who I would have thought would have been most um, acutely affected by people like translators, like writers, have had actually some of the most interesting strategies.
Mhm.
And I would have thought they would have been strongly in the denier camp,
Right.
and we've actually not seen that. Um, we've talked to several freelancers who are rebranding themselves as putting the voice back into the word. So sort of they've pivoted in a way where they've recognized that sort of their livelihood is likely being already replaced by artificial intelligence, but they still have a skill to offer. I think the more insidious part of it for freelancers is this. And the clients are making the assumption, they're making the assumption that workers are using artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
So for the deniers, they're in big trouble because they're not using artificial intelligence, yet the clients are actually changing their wages, assuming
That they
that
are.
people are using artificial intelligence. So it's actually a more complicated story. It's not a story about replication or replacement. It's actually a story of driving wages down. But there is where the rub lies, because while a freelancer might actually be more efficient, there is still a lot of unpaid labor that goes into finding work, unpaid labor that goes into man. So it's not a zero sum game. Even though they're getting more efficient so they can complete a job more quickly, there is unpaid labor associated with finding additional work. So in the end of the day, the freelancers, even the devotees, I would argue, are getting squeezed by the unpaid labor that has to sort of come into play with this kind of work.
Wow, those are great perspectives and anecdotal evidence. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Because I think, yeah, my next question was going to touch on the precarious nature of these sort of arrangements. So you mentioned it, right? A lot of your work focuses on what workers do to survive in this type of precarious work arrangements, and you gave an example of that. Um, so do you think the strategies that used to make sense before AI are still
Mm.
viable now of like we looked at the most successful Upworkers, right? Versus the ones that were maybe only getting a job here and there. Do you think the strategies have changed? Have you gotten any evidence around that?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the strategy is technology agnostic, which is you have to position yourself in a way that sort of you're adding value to the worker. The problem is that the clients are also using AI. So so the clients are using AI to write the job description. And then once the freelancer gets hired, they realize that the client had no idea what they were actually wanting to do, that they just plugged it into Claude or Gemini or whatever large language learning model. So they're having to do a lot of retraining that could have implications to their ratings, for example. So what they're having to do is something that they've never had to do before, which is be very transparent up front. Sort of vet the clients in a sophisticated way, vet the work in a more sophisticated way. So again, back to this unpaid labor aspect. Interestingly enough, I think the superstars are still sort of in the clouds in that respect. If you have such a specialized skill, artificial intelligence hasn't come for them quite yet. So I think the subset of high earners are still kind of insulated in ways that sort of the others haven't been. And I think that sort of gets to this question of, how is the progression of this technology going to affect workers differently? Because right now it certainly has its crosshairs on things like translation and entry level coding and maybe some sort of basic writing. But if this technology becomes as sophisticated as some people say it's going to, then it's going to also affect these workers. And these workers haven't actually been having
Yeah.
to do any of these tactics. So it'll be interesting to see what might happen to those workers.
How soon do you think that change will come, or do you think that's going to come quicker, or do you think we're like further out from those types of skilled workers, being affected by this type of technology?
Yeah,
It's hard to say.
it's hard to say. My general sense is those workers who have these ultra specialized skills will will continue to be in the short term insulated, but I think eventually reckoning is going to come. Because what we have learned is if you think about the first iteration of ChatGPT 3 years ago
Hmm.
to where it is now, the acceleration and the sophistication of the technology leads me to believe that at some point, sort of it's going to start being able to replicate
Yeah.
more than it already is, very sophisticated skills.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I agree with that as well. It's gonna come quicker than probably we might think too.
Yeah.
So it has changed a ton in the past 3 years. Like I also think about writing a dissertation and you and everybody that we worked with without ChatGPT. Like we didn't use
Yeah.
ChatGPT for like outlining our stuff, writing our information. So I just wonder how that's all going to change and if you're maybe seeing some of those early signs with like what I'm seeing is people now more so than before lack the ability to write well, to brains, to do these basic things that you would need to do as like an independent researcher or thinker. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so actually it's funny. I was just recently asked a couple of days ago, how this has changed how I do research.
Mhm.
And I'll take a sort of a step back in time. My advisor in grad school, Arnie Kalberg, uh, invited me to sort of write
Mhm.
a paper with him my sort of second year in. And I was this very eager graduate student, and we would meet every single week, and I was just chomping at the bit to write. And he just wanted to talk about this. He just wanted to talk about it, and I was getting really frustrated. I was like, let's do some writing around this. Let's do some writing around this. Let's go. And literally, I'd be like, okay, what do you want me to do between now and next week? And he'd be like, Mike, I just want you to think about this concept. And it was super frustrating to me. And so finally, we got to the point where he was like, okay, we're ready to write. We're ready to write. I want you to sort of write this, and I'm going to write this. And I was shocked by the quality of, I shouldn't have been, but I mean, but what he came out with was this beautiful, well thought out prose. And sort of after the fact, I mentioned it to him. I was like, Arnie, I have to tell you, I was very frustrated sort of in the sort of research process, but sort of I learned a lot insofar as sort of the importance of sort of, and you know what he told me, and it still sticks to my head. He's like, Mike, you have to remember that when I was writing my dissertation, it was on a typewriter. And he said,
No.
I was not ever going to write anything until I was ready to write about something, which was a very different way than I grew up, where, I grew up in the word processing era where I could write and I could delete. That was just not how that was just not how he learned to do research. So sort of coming full circle, um, I have this very sort of proven way that I like to do research. And artificial intelligence can help me sort of be a little bit more efficient in the way that I like to do research. But I think the AI native researchers, researchers that are just coming out now, will have such a different tool set to do research. And I don't know if it's going to be better or worse. It's just going to be different in the same way that the way Arnie did research was different than the way I did research. So all I can hope for is in the same way that sort of Arnie sort of showed me a different way of orienting myself to research, I can show young researchers a slightly different way to orient themselves that can maybe make them a more effective researcher. Because I certainly think that this ability to think about something conceptually before writing it was something important to me. But I have now the tools to write and flesh it out in a way that he didn't. Think about how these sort of tools are now allowing people to do data analysis and do literature review in a
Literature.
way that I wasn't able to. So I hope that sort of research is being changed in a more sophisticated way versus this idea. A lot of uh, haters of AI talk about sort of cognitive offloading, where people are no longer sort of doing the cognitive thinking; they're offloading it to the machine. I hope that's not the case because that would be problematic in research. You
Yeah.
still have to cognitively figure it out, but it is an efficient tool that you could use to sort of maybe hone an argument, think about different ways of approaching it, sort of asking it to challenge you in terms of the ways that you're thinking about approaching something. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the
No, it
stream of
does.
consciousness answer that
No,
came to my mind.
no, it does. And I'm glad to know I mean you have a more optimistic view of how they're going to be using these tools, but than I do, certainly. But I'm not sure. I think we're on a spectrum, like you were saying, in terms of like the people that are all in on AI and then doom and gloom. And I like your answer and hope that we go in that direction better than what I think is to come. And it might get worse before gets better and more sophisticated. But I think the people that are more strategic with it and are actually using it for the things that you just mentioned, that could take us really far in research. So
Yeah.
I love that optimistic view that you have. What are so you've written and done research on gig literacies and the skills that people need to navigate platform-based work or work in general now that technology is super embedded in work. What do you think gig literacy looks like in 2026? What are some of the top things you ought to know?
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that sort of it's come down to this because we've talked about algorithmic management and understanding how to do algorithms, but at the end of the day, at some point, and again, I'm going to sort of tailor this to of a more freelancer because I think it's different depending on sort of the gig that you're doing. Because certainly something like Uber is so driven by the algorithm. Sort of your
Yeah.
agency's a little bit different. Um, but for a freelancer, I think gig literacy is now also becoming about sort of understanding how to position yourself. Um, and certainly sort of you played an important part in sort of this idea about deconstructed identity and this idea of sort of what it means to sort of be managed by an algorithm. And
Yeah.
I think gig literacy now especially needs to be recognizing ways in which you can position yourself so that you maximize your ability for success with algorithmic management more than it's ever been because we're sort of assaulted by algorithms from the sort of the platform algorithm to the AI tools that the clients are using to your competition to sort of how the competition is using the technology. So I really do think that at the end of the day, successful sort of gig literacy, sort of at the freelance, is really about understanding how you can create agency for yourself within this algorithmically driven context of work.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And then I'm also curious, kind of as a follow-up to this and other points that you've had is, um, are there certain categories of workers that are adapting better? Or like you said, it was like not the people that you expected, but like, is there groups, maybe age groups or maybe categories of work, or is it just kind of spread out, like the people that are adapting versus not?
Yeah, I mean that remains to be seen. I guess I don't have enough data points to see general trends. My suspicion is that um, the the more creative the more creative freelance occupations, the more freelance creative occupations have a little bit more ability to market themselves differently in a way that technology doesn't. You can either code or you can't code,
Yeah.
and those occupations, it's pretty black and white. If you were asked to write, a Python script, you can now ask Claude to write a Python script. There's pretty objective sort of parameters you can put in. Writing, not so much. This designing pictures, not so much. You have to understand the context. So in many ways, a lot of these creative workers actually have a little bit more flexibility to position themselves in ways that historically, the creative workers tend to have faced a lot more of the competition, a lot more of the wage compression, sort of in this kind of work. They may actually have the advantage this time around, mostly because of the importance of understanding context, importance of understanding your client in ways that maybe artificial intelligence can't directly do, at least right now.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes in line with the next question I had about whether you agree that human skills like creativity, empathy, or judgment are like the safe zone in AI. Do you think that that is accurate, or do you think it's a little bit more complicated than that?
Well, I guess maybe sort of within the context of freelance work, I mean, we still can't get around the management of the algorithm. If the
Yeah,
algorithm is not showing you the jobs, you're just not going to be able to bid for it. But more broadly, I do think it's important.
yeah,
I think it's important in ways that, artificial intelligence is creating work based on the input that you're putting in. And it doesn't have, even though large language learning models are trained and this and that, it doesn't have the cultural clues, the contextual clues,
yeah,
the sort of things that can't necessarily be written down and described in an objective way that I think we can still grasp onto as humans not being replaced. I mean, so I do think those human skills are really important. And sort of putting on my hat as an undergraduate faculty member, talking to seniors who are entering this brave new world. I mean, they're still having to face recruiters who are using AI to read through their resumes. They're facing all of these technology. I mean, I literally talked to a student who was asked to respond to a question in 1 minute or less in a video and send it to them. And we were speculating what the company was doing, but I suspect it was probably trying to pick up I
yeah.
mean, who knows what they were doing? Uh, but at the end of the day, once you get into an interview, if you finally pass all of those hurdles, you still have to sort of show awareness of your surroundings. So while the bar is continuing to change and become different, I still think at the end of the day, those human skills are truly important attributes that workers need.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a it is complicated, but I tend to agree. And now it's even hard to know like I've done some interviews for people that we're hiring, and for me as an interviewer, now I'm having a hard time to figure out whether they're like using AI in the background to help them
Uh,
answer stuff. Like when they say things too robotically or like they spell out like if I ask them about HIPAA and then they give me the full acronym of that, I'm like, wait, like are you using some sort of assistive technology in the background, right?
yeah,
To help you out, which is a whole nother a whole nother side of things as well. So yeah, it's being used on both sides. Clients, workers, people interviewing on, the companies interviewing them. It's kind of wild.
it's the
Uh,
Wild West out there, isn't
it's
it?
it's the Wild West. With all these conversations about AI, do you think there's any other big shifts in the labor market that are not getting enough attention or coming under the radar?
Well, I mean, I guess there's two. Uh, One of the things that we're acutely feeling here at Skidmore College is the enrollment cliff. In
Mm.
2008, the birth rate went down. So, from a business perspective, as a college, now 18 years later in 2026, our pool of potential customers is smaller.
Oh,
Okay, so that has implications to the college, but that also means our labor force is shrinking. And we have a huge aging population of baby boomers that are starting to retire. So I think actually there's this three-legged stool that no one is talking about. One is the working age pool of individuals is smaller. And an enormous cohort of people are graduating. Um, so that's one leg of this stool. The other leg of the stool is I think that there's a growing skills mismatch. And is because part of it is because we're no longer training people at the entry level to come in. We're not hiring smart people who don't have skills.
yeah.
You're at the entry level hiring people who are supposed to have the skills day one.
Hmm.
So now we have a shrinking population of entry level workers. Okay. We have these very experienced workers who are now leaving pretty significant gaps that we want people to come in skills ready to replace. So we have that. So we have a skills mismatch. We have this demographic problem. And then we have this disruption in the marketplace that we've been talking about with artificial intelligence. And I just don't think that we have systematically thought about the labor market shift that's happening right now demographically in skills. It's all about AI. I get it. It's really all about AI. But the truth of the matter is there's a skills mismatch and a demographic shift that I don't think we're ready for. And not to get into geopolitics, but if our replacement rate for our workers is low, and we have a sort of protectionist policy of workers coming into our labor force. Well, how are we going to replace these workers? Because we're not going to be able to replace them internally. So I think that's a story that's not being told that I think is going to play out very soon because people are retiring and there's not as many people of working age.
Yeah, that is a huge problem. And I know the skills mismatch is something that I've been thinking about, but I like the way that you put it as a three-legged stool because it really is like a combined problem with like all these things clashing and coming together at once. And like you said, it probably will hit us pretty hard here soon. And we'll just have to be more retroactive because the whole conversation right now is AI and everything else is kind of being thrown by the wayside. Like we're not paying attention to anything else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, do you think there's any conversations around policy that are missing? I don't know. I don't think policy is caught up in terms of where we are with AI, but like, is there any specific thing that around policy that's missing?
Oh, geez. Policy is always the last. It's always lagging, especially sort of with the rate of adoption, the rate of change. Um, I guess from a policy perspective, from a policy perspective, I always sort of fall back on social policy as a policy that I think the United States really needs. Um, from a worker, both from a worker support, but a worker protection sort of
Yeah.
perspective, because we are, and this is also a systematic problem to your previous question. We have all of these retirees we have all of these retirees who are going to be dependent on the Social Security that's being funded by existing workers. Well, if we don't have workers to sort of fill these jobs, then sort of the pool of Social Security. But sort of beyond just that, this idea that uh, things like benefits are tied to employers, um, so the social policy about the way benefits are managed, social policy around unemployment are really predicated on an infrastructure and sort of system institution of work that doesn't exist anymore. And I think artificial intelligence is going to accelerate that. There might be a greater rate of unemployment, there might be a greater rate of sort of freelance work, and policy is not, our country is not set up to support these workers in a meaningful way. So I think from an AI perspective, it's just accelerating what I think is already a deficiency in sort of policy, which is the lack of social policy to protect workers.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think we've had some policy issues for a while now, and we can't seem to catch up with any of it. So I think that's an important discussion to be had. And I know there's a lot of other really smart policy folks looking
Yeah.
into these sort of things as well. So I just have two last questions that I'm hoping to ask the different guests that I talk to. And so the first one is, what is one idea, book, or piece of research that shaped how you think about the future of work?
Mm. Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is actually from, I think, 1999 or 2000, actually,
Nice.
but it's sort of really been influential in my work is sort of this like Peter Capelli's New Deal at Work. And it was influential insofar as at that time I was entering my first career. I just graduated business school and I was entering sort of the corporate workforce. And I was shocked about what they expected me to do out the door. And I was shocked about the commitment that they had. And at the time, Peter Capelli was saying, look, work is, excuse me, not what it used to be. There is not an internal career ladder. You're not being promoted from within. You are coming in expecting to have skills. The employer-employee relationship is different. And that was a really sort of influential piece as I started to translate what Peter Capelli was really focusing on, sort of the traditional workplace, lack of internal career ladders, lack of commitment on either side. As I was trying to think about non-standard work, this sort of idea of sort of how work was changing was really an important sort of part of sort of developing sort of my identity as a scholar.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great one to highlight. Um, okay, and then last question is, what is the best piece of career of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of career advice I've ever received. Um, well, so sort of back again to when I graduated my first iteration of business school. Um, you know, I got offered a job which I ended up taking, which was a product development manager that led to a product manager role. And I was really not qualified for this job at all. I mean, yes, I, had an MBA with strategy and this or that, but this idea that I could come in and develop new product ideas and implement them in the marketplace was kind of a farce to me. And I remember talking to um, my twin brother of all people. And sort of we were talking about this, and we really got to sort of this idea that maybe it's important to say yes to things you're not ready for. If someone has a belief in you to do it, even if you're not ready to do it, say yes to it. Because things like the stretch assignment, things that you don't know what you're capable of doing until you do it. And I was really successful at that job, even though I didn't feel like I was ready to do that job. And so this idea that uh, you're not qualified to do, people make narratives in their heads about their ability to do something or not do something. And when someone gives you an opportunity and they believe in you, then I would say yes to things you don't think you're ready for.
That's a great piece of advice. I love it. Um, did you have any other thoughts that came to mind along the way?
Yeah, so there was one thing that came to mind that I wanted to just throw out there.
Yeah.
And it started when we were thinking about the algorithmic management, and then kind of touched back to it when we were talking about policy. And this is just really a thought a thought exercise. But if you think about OSHA and you think about workplace exposures and workplace health and safety, it's really built around exposure, right? Can you smell something? Are you being exposed to it? Can you feel the heat? How long have you been how long have you been at this particular work situation, etc.? So it's predicated on something you can see, something you can hear, something you can feel, something you can smell, something where you can take a monitor and
Yeah.
measure it. That is what our workplace protection is based around. But if you think about it, we as gig workers are exposed to algorithms.
Yeah.
You can't see them, you can't smell them, you can't hear them, you can't measure them, yet they are having profound impacts on how people are experiencing work. And it's just something that I always come back to when I think about these gig workers is they are being exposed to algorithms. We're being exposed to algorithms.
Yeah.
And our workplace protections and policies are based on exposures, but we can't see, hear, smell, taste, feel, see something that we're being exposed to. Yet these workers are being exposed to it. And it's something that's always been at the back of my head. Like, is there a way in which we could regulate exposures to algorithms to try to understand if there's safety and health implications to it? And it's just something that's been percolating in my head for years, and I
Yeah.
just haven't been able to wrap my head around.
Yeah, and I think there's not enough resources, obviously. There's not enough policy to implement these things. I think, the tech companies themselves are not gonna
Yeah,
monitor themselves necessarily. And if they do, it's not always it tends to be disingenuous. They do it for a certain cloud or, and then there are a couple of researchers out there who are very vocal about algorithms and they've started like I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I think it's the algorithmic Justice League or something. Like there's small organizations, but this is a huge problem, right? There's such big companies, so much investment in AI. Like it's gonna take a lot more. Like you're saying, it maybe is a full regulating body. It's not gonna be OSHA. It's
Yeah,
probably, like OSHA, it's
yeah,
gotta be something. But I appreciate those thoughts. I do think there's a lot there that needs to be managed, and it's growing so quickly, and we're not catching up to it.
yeah.
So the impacts are just going to grow and grow. And I mean, as our research has looked at, it doesn't affect everyone equally. So,
No,
and we don't know who the algorithm, I mean, we know who the algorithms are discriminating against and
yeah,
who's being impacted. But at the end of the day, those things are not very transparent. So
no.
I appreciate all your words of wisdom. So thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts here with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.